Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast IT Coach for Small Business Leaders. Joining me today is the IT Coach, Aaron Swan. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Danika?
I'm good. Another day, another dollar. Can't complain.
Yes.
I do want to mention before we begin, due to the ongoing pandemic and everything that's going on, we are still working remote. So that means we are, if you're watching this right now, you can see this, recording over a Teams meeting. So with this is going to come some technical difficulties at times. So if you hear something or see something out of place, we're sorry in advance, but it's just something that we're having to deal with right now, going through this. So with that, we are excited to be continuing the series of answering questions from listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Danika. And I do want to take the opportunity to introduce you, Danika Veldkamp, as our new co-host for this podcast. Previously, she's been behind the scenes. She's released some videos about that, but now she's taken over Josh's position. Josh has moved on to some other things with marketing, and so Danika is going to be our new co-host. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I have some big shoes to fill, so hopefully I can keep up.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Well, today, the question that we are answering is, how do you protect your company, internet-wise, of course, when your company is located on a busy highway, when it's surrounded by other businesses, and maybe even near residential housing? So
Sure.
I'm excited to get started with that.
Yeah. So, and this is certainly an issue that we have run into many times. I think the question is, and the listener doesn't specify this, I think this is probably related mostly to wireless security because that's where that kind of concern comes in. But let's take a moment before we jump into wireless. I think physical security is always important, no matter where your business is. So I want to touch on a couple of things that relate to that. So, I think some of them are obvious. You should have locks on your doors. You should have locks on your server room door or network equipment that should be locked up. So control access to servers, obviously, but network switches even beyond that. I would even take it so far as to say, a common exploit place that people could find, put someone in a conference room. It's not uncommon to find a conference room with some network jacks in there. You may have your wireless locked down. No one can get on that without a passkey, but it doesn't stop someone, if they were left unattended, they could plug into that jack in the conference room and be on your network. So there's some things that you can do about that, such as simply switching those ports off when they're not in use, or not leaving someone unsupervised. So just some things to think about on the physical side of the house. But like I said, I think the question is probably more about wireless than it is anything. So let's talk a little bit about wireless security. So first of all, let's just talk about the first thing people think about when it comes to wireless security is just simply the passkey or the encryption. Make sure that you are encrypting it. This is 2020. Wireless has been around for quite a while, but it's still not uncommon for me to walk into a residential place or a business and find, first of all, just the wireless completely wide open, right? Not even encrypted. And so that's number one no-no. Make sure you are using encryption. Beyond that is the standards of encryption. So if you get into set up the router at all, especially in a home environment, if you're doing that, you'll see different choices of encryption strength. You ought to, at a minimum, be using WPA2. WPA2 has been the standard for several years now. We're starting to see WPA3. It's been certified as a standard. It's starting to show up in some manufacturers' routers now. We still don't have full support for it across all clients. So for now, WPA2 is still the go-to standard. But as WPA3 comes out, certainly would encourage you to move to that, because that's going to be an even stronger way to go.
We'll be back with the IT Coach for Small Business Leaders podcast after we pause for this special message. I'm Josh Davis, VP of Marketing at InfoSystems. You may have seen me co-hosting episodes of our podcast, IT Coach for Small Business Leaders. Did you know that you can book a personal IT strategy session with Aaron Swan, host of this podcast? We created this podcast to be a valuable resource for small business leaders in our community, but we wanted to take it one step further. You can book a free meeting with Aaron Swan to review your IT strategy and help you build a plan that will lead to IT success. Just visit our website at www.infosystems.biz, follow the link to book your IT strategy session, and you'll be able to work directly with Aaron to build your IT strategy. Now back to the podcast.
Can I go back for a moment when you were
Sure.
discussing the routers? Now, I know you've talked about this in previous episodes, but for businesses that are maybe, and if this is a thing, I'm not quite sure if it is, but for businesses that maybe are renting through their internet company, can they set those, is it encrypted like it would be if you had your own personal like router?
Yeah, great question. And that absolutely does happen, that the internet provider can provide the router for you. The answer to that is it should be, and it's really your responsibility as a user or the business owner to make sure that it is.
Okay.
So if you can just connect to it, then I would get on the phone with that ISP immediately and say, hey, we need to lock this down. So make sure you're set to WPA2. Make sure you're using a good key, right? So don't just use something simple. You know, it's still common for me to walk in and find the business is using their phone number or their address or the name of their business.
Okay.
It really ought to be just a nonsensical string of letters and numbers. I would say, you know, longer is better. Let's get up there at 16 characters if we can. It should be difficult. It's not something you have to type in or remember all the time. It's going to help keep you secure. Go ahead.
Now, I saw something online, and it was, I think, a video that I was watching a while ago from a cybersecurity expert, and he was talking about the best passwords that you can have. And he mentioned to just have a random phrase that only you could think of. And he said, you know, you don't always have to use a mixture of letters and numbers and key characters. Sometimes it's as simple as maybe only something that you can think of in the moment. I love this comfortable chair, or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's good. And we'll talk more in a moment about access to that phrase. So as long as you're keeping that, you know, private, not just spreading that around, I think that can work very well.
Okay.
Again, random is the key. You know, I like this comfortable chair. That's a good one because that no way ties to you or anything about you. You know, but if it's something that can be identified, if it's your, you know, your company logo or your company chant or theme or whatever it is, I probably would not go that way. How many companies have a chant? Anyway, before I dive into that, let me say one more thing about the encryption strength, just because it's something I see way too often. There is an encryption called WEP, called Wireless Equivalent Privacy, I believe is what it stood for. That's been deprecated since 2004. Where, like I said a moment ago, it's 2020 now, so 16 years. 16 years ago, it was decided that encryption does not work. It's very easily breakable, but yet still to this day, I find it in use at businesses. So I encourage business owners to check, make sure you're not using WEP as your encryption strength, because that it's easily breakable. Ways to find exploits for that. So let's talk about controlling access to that key, though. You know, let's pretend like we are using, what was it? I like this comfortable chair.
Yep.
If I'm the business owner and that's my encryption that I'm using for my wireless, I would encourage you to not just hand that out to employees and say, here's the wireless, put it into your device. I would encourage you as the business owner or your IT people, get someone that's their responsibility to put people's devices on the wireless network rather than publishing that around. That way you minimize how much that key gets spread around. You don't want your employees, let's use the example of an employee comes in and they're working night or a weekend or something, and then their wife comes with them or their children come with them, and then they hand that key out to them. So now your security starts to get compromised. So, technically, even if you as the business owner put it in, there are ways they could discover it, but they have to know what they're doing. So it's an additional layer of security if you control that passphrase and not hand it out to people.
I think too, even going a step further, if you have people coming in, employees' children, employees' friends, and they're just giving out that password, right? And they're on your network. They could be downloading things. They could be pirating movies, because that's pretty common nowadays, especially for the younger generation, pirating shows. And that can actually get companies in a lot of trouble.
Yes, it can. You're absolutely right. And that's an excellent segue to the next point I want to talk about too, is on your wireless network, if you're going to allow guest access at all, and there's certainly reasons to do that. I work with several medical practices, and they have a guest network set up in their waiting room so that their patients have something to do while they're waiting on the provider. Make sure that's a separate network. For obvious reasons. One, you don't want them being able to get onto your corporate network, so it needs to be isolated, but it also needs to be controlled. So I would encourage you not to just leave that network wide open where anyone can get on it. There should be some type of control on it. It doesn't have to be super tight like it does for your corporate network. But again, and for the very reason that you just said, you don't want people coming there perhaps after hours and doing things on your internet connection, whether it be, we've run into places where people were using another business's network, their internet access, to set up adult sites or break the law in some other way. So very, very dangerous to just give wide open access to that. So I encourage you to keep that controlled. Beyond that, then, we talked about the minimum layer of security, right? Having that good pass key on that. Beyond that, I would even encourage you to consider additional layers. The reason for that is, think about, so I've got a situation where I've got this wireless key. Let's pretend like I've not followed my own advice and my employees know that wireless key. What happens when one of them leaves the company? Well, now I've got a ex-employee that knows the wireless key to my network. Might be a disgruntled ex-employee, I don't know. And so now my recourse is I've got to change that. Well, that could be a hassle, having to change that key every time someone leaves your company. If you have any type of turnover, that can get difficult in a hurry. So there are some additional things that you can do to secure your network. One of this is called MAC address filtering. You can actually set up, when you allow people onto your network, you can capture the MAC address. That's the hardware identifier of that particular piece of hardware, whether it be a laptop or a mobile phone. You can put that into your wireless network controller, and then it ties that device. It allows it on. If that MAC address isn't in the controller, that device isn't allowed on. So then if someone leaves the company, you can just simply remove that MAC address. And so that definitely enhances your security. Some wireless providers even something called dynamic pre-shared key. Without getting too technical, the idea behind it is the first time that you get them on the network, you can have them authenticate. They can type in their username and password. It then ties their own pre-shared key that's unique to them. It ties it to that particular device, and it logs it in the system under their name. Now I've got some really nice security because everyone's got a different encryption key. And if someone leaves the company, I just simply delete that record off their name.
Okay.
And then they won't be able to access it again.
Okay. Yep. And I know for personal internet, like for routers that I've gone into and personalized back home, I was able to go in and find IP addresses and specifically allow or block specific IP addresses from doing certain things. And would either of those fit into that category, or would that be something on its own?
Yeah, so I think you need to think in that instance the difference between a home environment and a business environment. As you said, in a home environment, it's very common to see a router. That router is probably a combination Wi-Fi router, and it's got a little bit of firewall capabilities in it as well. In the business environment, typically those are separated. So you'd have your wireless access point. They could be together in a very small business, but oftentimes those are separated. And so what you described, controlling access to certain IPs and what they could do, that would typically be the job of the firewall rather than the wireless access point. But it does happen. There are small businesses that have a built-in combination device. If your business is small, you have 4 or 5 people, one of those might be appropriate for you as long as it's business class.
Okay.
Last thing I'll say, and this is really less about security and more about just getting your wireless to work correctly. So I just wanted to mention that, the original question was talking about if your business is in a high congestion area, right? So there's a lot of businesses, a lot of people around. So the other problem that you see with wireless in that situation isn't just security, it's just getting it to work. Because if the bandwidth gets very crowded, it can be tough. And we've certainly run into some businesses, companies that we have are customers of ours that work in office parks, and there's a number of businesses in there. So a couple things that you can do about that. One is, as of today, there are 2 bandwidths that wireless runs on. There's the 2.4 and then there's the 5 gigahertz. So using the 5 gigahertz can help with that because there are more frequencies available. And then there's some good news coming on the horizon, and that is the FCC has approved that they're now going to allow wireless manufacturers to use the 6 gigahertz range for new wireless devices. That provides even more frequencies than the 5 does. And so I think that's really going to help wireless in the future. It's going to help ease that congestion and just allow for better performance. So coming soon, it's not quite ready yet. Manufacturers are starting to build that into devices, but it can take a while because you've got to get both sides of the equation, both the routers plus the endpoints.
Yeah, and what could that mean for small business owners, for, I guess, anybody that would be using it?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. One, the higher up in the frequency you go, you get more bandwidth out of that as well. For example, 2.4 gigahertz is great for extending coverage out to greater distances. The reason for that is lower frequencies travel further. If you think about, I think I've made this analogy on this podcast before, but if you stop at a traffic light and you hear the car next to you music playing, they've got it to turn really loud. What do you usually hear?
The bass. Boom, boom,
The
boom,
bass,
boom.
exactly. Right. You hear that bass thumping because low frequencies travel further. However, so that's the good side of low frequency. The bad side to it is they don't carry as much information. Higher bandwidth, higher frequencies carry more data. So a higher, like a 5 gigahertz frequency, it won't go as far, but you can carry more bandwidth, and so you can get faster speeds. So that's going to be true with 6 gigahertz as well. As you go up, you get faster speeds. It doesn't travel as far, but there's more frequencies. So there's more opportunity to ease that congestion problem. So a lot of benefits from this coming.
Yeah, I think that holds a lot of great things for business owners in the future.
It does.
Well, good. I think this episode has been very educational. Hopefully for those of you listening and watching, you have learned some new things today. Did you have any other comments, Aaron, before we tune off today?
I think that's what I had to cover from that question.
Awesome. Well, very much appreciate you as always, bringing in some very good information. And for those of you watching, listening, make sure to tune in to our next episode where we talk about malware, specifically malicious emails, and how easy it is to spread and how to minimize that. So for those of you that haven't tuned in on our social media platforms, we have LinkedIn, we have Facebook, and we have Twitter. We are posting on there daily some really good information, and we are always checking. So if you have questions, if you have feedback, you can comment on a post, you can message us, and each podcast episode has its own blog page. And there's an email on there and sometimes a text number that specifically sends to me. So any questions, any feedback, you can send to that email or my phone number as well. But hopefully we will see you on the next episode. Thank you all for tuning in again. And until next time, bye.